So most broadly, gender-based violence is violence that is directed at an individual based on their biological sex or gender identity. In the United States, this includes physical, sexual, verbal, emotional, and psychological abuse, threats, coercion, and economic or educational deprivation, whether this occurs in public or in private. The US government takes addressing and ending gender-based violence very seriously. The White House has a Gender Policy Council that recently released a national strategy on gender equity and equality, and is soon to release the National Action Plan to end gender-based violence in the United States. We also have a Violence Against Women Act that defines major criminal offenses such as domestic violence, sexual assault, dating violence, and stalking, as well as female genital mutilation and forced marriage. And it provides funding for programs across all 50 states that includes free legal aid, emergency safe and confidential shelters for women at risk of violence, social services, and culturally specific support programs. When we use the term domestic violence in the US, every single state has a definition, as does the federal government. In general, domestic violence is the willful intimidation, physical assault, battery, sexual assault, and/or abusive behavior as part of a pattern of power and control perpetrated by one person against another person in a relationship. Again, every state and the federal government has laws against domestic violence, and perpetrators can be found guilty of criminal offenses, and survivors of sexual assault are often eligible for protection orders, and that's survivors of sexual assault, domestic violence, and other forms of harm. When we say sexual violence in the United States, we mean many things often. Intimate partner or non-intimate partner, that includes strangers. Perpetrating sexual violence, including rape, harassment, incest, technology-based violence, where someone forces you to view or listen to explicit content that you do not want to, sexual abuse by medical professionals, multi-perpetrator sexual assault, and the sexual abuse of people with disabilities.
Casey, I'm going to ask you to pause as the interpreters are needing more time.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay, so the United States also defines forced marriage in our Violence Against Women Act. And a forced marriage is defined as one where one or both people do not or cannot consent to the marriage, and typically involves elements of force, fraud, or coercion. It is not arranged marriage, in which families may take the lead, but if the ultimate choice to decide whether, when, and whom to marry remains with the individual, that is not defined as forced marriage in the US. We understand these definitions can be blurry or confusing, but ultimately it is up to each individual person to know whether or not they have consented, and advocates are here to help. And finally, we wanted to share with you the definition of child marriage in the United States. And child marriage refers to any formal marriage or informal union between an individual under the age of 18 years old and an adult, or two individuals who are both under the age of 18. While not every child marriage can be classified as a forced marriage. Mounting global and US-based research shows that, forced or not, child marriage typically leads to devastating lifelong consequences for girls, including increased vulnerability to gender-based violence, decreased likelihood of finishing school, increased physical and mental health concerns, and starkly, up to 80% of marriages that involve one person under the age of 18 tend to end in divorce, which further destabilizes the lives of women and girls. And finally, you may hear the word survivor being used in this presentation a lot. In the United States, we often use the word survivor to refer to an individual who has been targeted for abuse. Sometimes you may also hear these individuals referred to as victims. The distinction here is that the term survivor centers the whole person. And in many circles, advocates and survivors feel that the word victim centers the harm and not the person, and can feel diminishing as a term or as a label. So when we say the word survivor, we often mean someone who has experienced or is currently experiencing gender-based violence. In the interest of time, Halitz, I'm going to skip these slides and hand the presentation off. Actually, just go to the end of mine. So just as a reminder, all states and the federal government have laws against gender-based violence that both punish perpetrators and protect victims. And all across the country, there are resources and organizations available to you to provide free, emergency, safe shelter for women at risk of gender-based violence. And there are even some shelters that are culturally specific and those that cater to the needs of Muslim survivors or survivors from other religious or linguistic backgrounds. We will be sharing a link to a translated set of documents that will have resources listed in your language with the contact telephone numbers and email addresses for those resources at the end of the presentation. And we hope that you will always feel welcome and empowered to reach out to these resources for support for yourself or for someone you know or someone you love. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to the next speaker.
Hello, everyone. I am Payal Sinha, and I am the managing attorney at San Francisco location of Tahirih Justice Center. And I just want to begin by thanking you all for being at this presentation. I will be covering some form of immigration relief that a survivor or a victim of gender-based violence might be eligible for, and some benefits that are attached to it. But before I proceed, I just wanted to let you know that this is all some basic information that you should all be aware of. in case this might be helpful for someone you might know, but I highly recommend if you or someone that you might know fit into these immigration relief criteria, consult an immigration attorney.
Casey, we can move forward.
Thank you. Asylum is a form of immigration relief for people who have come to the United States and are scared or afraid to return to their home country because they have been hurt in the past, or it could be because they fear that might happen to them. We will move forward with covering what is the eligibility of asylum and specifically gender-based asylum. One might qualify for this relief if they are in the United States and not a citizen. They cannot return to their home country because either they feel that they have been harmed in the past, or there is a fear that they will be harmed in the future. And moving forward, we will go over these elements in a little more detail. To be eligible, as I mentioned, for asylum, you have been harmed or have a good reason to believe that you will be harmed in your country. And these reasons could be your race, your religion or perceived religious beliefs, or not adhering to the religious belief that the country has, so the lack thereof, nationality, or political opinion, or something else about you that you cannot change or shouldn't have to change. For example, a harm can be committed to you, against you, or against someone just because of their gender, which could mean sexual or domestic violence, emotional or economic abuse, or it could be regressive cultural practices that could include honor killing and more. Also, the fear is being placed because you have tried to get some help in your home country, but you are unable to protect yourself from the harm because you did not get that help. Which means the government of your country either has caused this harm or are unable or unwilling to protect you from this harm. For example, government or any group, a militia group, has caused this harm against a woman just because it's related to their ethnicity. So it could be a sexual violence against a group of women because they don't adhere to their principles or the norms that that group decided it to be. And there is no safe place in your home country where you could even relocate, because the government is unable to protect you from this group. And it has
میشنویم ولی بعضی وقتا صدای شما قطع و وصل میشه. ببخشید.
And it hasn't been more than 1 year since your initial arrival. And if anyone has any follow-up questions, we will dedicate some time in the end, hopefully to answer those questions. Thank you. The legal benefits of applying for asylum, if you feel that you qualify for it, as I mentioned, please consult an immigration attorney so that they can see if you would be. The benefits are, one would be able to apply for permanent residency if and when their asylum was granted after a year of that grant of asylee status. You would be able to get an employment authorization, which is also known as work permit, a social security card, which is important in the US to build your credit history and get payments, and driver's license. Thank you. Now we move on to another form of relief, which is called Violence Against Women Act self-petition. Violence Against Women Act was enacted in 1994 by Congress to offer protection for battered women and abused children. The goal was to stop immigration status from being used as a tool to control immigrants' victims of domestic violence by their abuser. It provides an opportunity for non-citizens who have been subjected to domestic violence to be able to legalize their status without their abusive spouse consent or knowledge. We will go over how can one be eligible for VAWA very briefly, so that one has an understanding of how this protection plays out. In order for someone to qualify for this immigration relief, a person has to be either married to an abusive spouse, or if there is a violence by a child against them, or if it's a child whose parent is abusive, the abusive spouse, child, or a parent must be a US citizen or a permanent resident. A permanent resident is someone who has the green card. So the status of abuser needs to be either a US citizen or an LPR. If you are married to an abuser, you have to also show that the abuse occurred during marriage and the marriage was in good faith. not because you wanted to acquire an immigration status. That's the basis of this application. One has to also show that the abuse must have occurred in the US while living together. So some evidence of shared residence. Most importantly, evidence of physical, mental, or sexual abuse. So acts of abuse, isolation, verbal abuse, emotional abuse, threats, everything counts. Doesn't have to be one kind of abuse, it can be a mix of all. The most important requirement is that you don't have to file a police complaint to be eligible for this kind of immigration relief. It's based on your story. As long as you can show an immigration officer that you met these elements or some of these elements of battery or cruelty. And the last thing is to show good moral character, that you have been a good citizen in this country and have not committed any crime.
Hi, Al. Before you continue, I just wanted to let you know that you have about 10 minutes or a little less.
Thank you. VAWA has similar benefits as an asylee. So I'm going to skip this slide and move forward to the next. Thank you. Trafficking visa is another form of relief available to any individuals who are victims of severe form of trafficking in person. There are two recognized forms of trafficking: labor trafficking, in which traffickers uses force and fraud to compel people to provide their labor and services. So example could be forced to work as domestic servants, farm workers, or factory workers in inhumane conditions with little or no pay, and sex trafficking, which includes forcibly putting someone for commercial sexual act. And it is a form of protection for these kind of survivors. Thank you. In order for someone to be eligible, the basis of this relief is that a survivor needs to be a victim of these trafficking and has to show continuous cooperation with the officer, the law enforcement officer, or the investigating body, and would have to also show extreme hardship if they were to leave, if they were to remove from this country, and physical and psychological trauma. Could we move to the next slide? And the benefits are pretty similar to what we have talked about: the opportunity to permanent residency and public benefits. Also, in all the form of relief that we talked about, one might be also be eligible to apply for their family. And lastly, I wanted to talk about briefly U visa. U visa is an immigration relief created by Congress to ensure that there is some kind of trust between law enforcement agencies and immigrants for their cooperation in investigating criminal activities. And as we move forward, you will understand it better as to what happens in U visa. Eligibility for U visa is a person has to be a victim of criminal activity, and it has to be a qualifying criminal activity. And in the next slide, we'll just go over a list quickly.
ببخشید نیست صدایتان درست نمیآید نمیفهمیم که چی میگین.
Sorry, we will.
نه درست نمیشنم. من نفهمیدم که شما چی میگین.
Just hold on a second, Payal. Thank you.
بله. درست میشنم.
Payal, you may continue.
Sounds good. Thank you. Could we go back to the slide? Thank you. In order for someone to be eligible for U visa, a person needs to be a victim of qualifying criminal activity, and a person need to be having the information regarding that criminal activity. They need to cooperate with the law enforcement official. So one must be a victim of crime for which they might have called the police, and they continue to answer follow-up questions from the police. And because of the incident, someone must have suffered a substantial physical or mental injury, could be in the form of extreme trauma that they are having nightmares, or could be in a form of a physical injury for which they must have gone to see a doctor. And if you check all these boxes, you would be eligible for U visa relief. And U visa also allows you to apply for some kind of a waiver for certain inadmissibilities, which is inadmissibility is a ground for which you or one must think that they might not qualify to be in US. For example, overstaying your visa, or it could be coming to the US without any documentation. There are some kind of a relief under all these kinds of immigration relief that we talked about. It's called a waiver, which you could file with any of these reliefs to be eligible to stay in the US for a longer period of time. The qualifying criminal activity that we were talking about, which was the basis of U visa, are these kind of crimes. If you are a victim of domestic violence, sexual assault, trafficking, murder, and any adjoining activities that are related to these major umbrellas, then you might be eligible for U visa if you have filed a police report and have continued cooperation with law enforcement. And it has similar benefits. You would be eligible to get work authorization, social security, driver's license, can petition for your family members, and also apply for permanent residency. And I would move forward by thanking you all, and thank you for providing me this opportunity and handing it off to the next speaker.
Good afternoon. My name is Leslie Orloff, and I direct the National Immigrant Women's Advocacy Project at American University, Washington College of Law. And I'm going to pick up on the great presentation that Payal presented and give you a little bit more detail about some additional forms of immigration relief, and then talk about, at this point in the presentation, some family law protections. Yes?
Leslie, I'm going to pause you for a minute. I need this slide regarding interpretation audio instructions.
Sure,
If you could
sure.
please hold for just a couple of minutes.
Not
Thank you. We'll hold for a few more seconds as a few late arrivals have just joined.
رو نداریم کلا.
Thank you, Leslie.
استاد درست است باز یک دفعه صدایتان قطع وصل میشه چه مشکل اینترنت است یا میکروفون تلفن ها خراب است چه رقم است
دا به د انټرنیټ کومه ستونزه وي اوس تاسې اورئ پښتو ترجمه
بله وروره اوس اواز سم سو
سمه ده
Tamim, if you are interpreting at this time, you are in the wrong audio. Let me go ahead and try to place you in the right room. Give me just a second. But please feel free to interpret if folks are asking how to find the audio.
Excuse me, ma'am. During the seminar, your voice became stopped. We cannot hear your sound.
So give me just a minute to ensure that our second interpreter is in the right audio. Thank you so much.
No problem.
میبخشی استاد اگر میشه یک کم واضح‌تر اگر ترجمه کنین چون که ما درباره سیلم چیزا گفتین ما یه چیزا رو نفهمیدیم متاسفانه دیگه اگر شما یک کم واضح‌تر امور بگین خوب میشه بخشش با
یه قسمی هست
سوال داریم سوال داریم
سوال وقتی میتونیم پرسان کنیم که ما موضوع رو متوجه بشیم و ما موضوع رو سرش اگر میفهمیم مثلا وسط مطلب یا آخر مطلب متوجه نمیشیم نمیفهمم یا ترجمه شما مثلا کنده کنده است یا اینکه صدا برای ما کنده کنده و قطع و وصل میشه از همین خاطر وقتی مطلب نمیگیریم باز در آخر پرسان نمیتونیم
نه خواهر محترم صدا خو قدر مشکل شاید نداشته باشه استاد ناراحت نشوین شاید مشکل در ترجمه شما نباشه تا یک ذره واضح بگین یک مطلب واضح بگین که ما رو مفهوم میشه بفهمیم مثال درباره سیلم گفت ما اصل موضوع را نفهمیدید که در چی قسم بود یا درباره حقوق زن گفت یا درباره تجاوز و گپ سخن ما هیچ نفهمیدیم که سر گپ در کجا بود و اصل گپ در کجا بود یعنی چرا اگر از خواهش می‌کنم شما ناراحت نشین بخشش باشه دیگه امور یک ذره واضح‌تر اگه بگین که ما بفهمیم چون که بعض چیزا برای ما کلیدی باشه
Ahmad, I don't believe that folks can hear Tamim. And
باز شما مشکل
you will
حل
have to do the
بکنید
Pashto
که با اونا
interpretation.
بگین که یک شرایط برای شما مساعد بکنه که یک ذره واضح‌تر با ما بگین که ما بفهمیم البته بخشش باشه
And apologies, folks, I will have to mute you guys now so we can continue the presentation. If there's questions, we'll do our best to take them at the end. Apologies that we can't control any of the audio changes at this time. Leslie, I'm going to ask you to continue. Thank you.
So I was saying, my name is Leslie Orloff, and I direct New App at American University, Washington College of Law. I've been involved in developing, actually, the immigration relief for immigrant survivors in the US, and I'm very happy to be here today. Before I start to discuss the language access rights, I want to touch on a few additional points In addition to the forms of immigration relief Payal just discussed for survivors of domestic violence and crime, there is a form of immigration relief called special immigrant juvenile status, which also may be something that you should know about, because it basically offers protection to children who've been victims of abuse, abandonment, or neglect by one of their parents anywhere in the world. So you may be here with family members who qualify for that.
Excuse me, can I interrupt you? You are talking, apologize, you are talking very fast.
I'll go slower.
And
I'll go
people
slower.
have no access to translation.
Okay,
Please be come slow to help the translator to do it.
Okay. I will speak more slowly. So, special immigrant juvenile status is a form of immigration relief that helps children who've been abused, abandoned, or neglected by one of their family members, by a parent, either in the United States or abroad. You may have children who experience abuse in the United States who would qualify for this. You also may have family members with you who may qualify for that form of immigration relief, so I wanted to cover it. In addition, there is something called Violence Against Women Act Confidentiality that
Leslie?
offers, yes?
I apologize, but we are getting feedback that we do need to slow down a lot more. Thank you.
Okay. There's something called Violence Against Women Act Confidentiality. And this offers protection from deportation to immigrant survivors who file the kinds of immigration cases we've been discussing today. And it stops government officials from using information from abusers against their victims. In order to get this kind of relief protection, victims or survivors need to generally file an immigration case. Next slide, please. There's also forms of immigration relief, I'm not sure where they're coming from.
Leslie,
We'll stay here. It's fine. Okay. I'll just summarize what I'm doing and then I'll try to follow where you cut out. Okay.
Well,
it's fine. It's fine. There's also protections at various different locations where immigration enforcement can't occur that you should be aware of as well. Things like schools, healthcare centers, courthouses that are safe places for people to go without fear of deportation. I'm going to turn right now, though, to talk about US family laws that offer protection to family members and crime victims that I'm going to focus on. Next slide, please.
Leslie, we're going to advance the slides 3 to 5 seconds after because the interpreters need more time.
No problem. No problem.
Thank you.
I'm just telling you when I'm ready for the next.
Sorry, can I start my turn? This is me, Sohaila Hufiani, and after this slide, I will translate this next paragraphs or slides.
Sohaila, you're in the wrong audio.
I'm the wrong video?
In the wrong audio, yes. You will need, if you switched your device, you will need to click into the Dari room so you can be in the right audio.
Just 1 second.
Elites, let me know when you're ready for me to continue.
Manas, I'm going to ask you to continue interpreting in Dari as Sohaila's audio is not in the right room. Manas, please continue once Leslie begins her presentation.
Next slide, please. So the first form of family court protection I'm going to talk about has to do with things we call civil protection orders. They are available for victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, stalking, harassment, and human trafficking in many states, most states. And they are independent of the criminal justice system. So they're a form of relief that the victim controls. Next slide when you're ready. And these are the primary forms of protection orders: domestic violence, child abuse, sexual assault, stalking, anti-harassment, and firearms that are available in most states, all states. And there's a link here to where you can look up the individual laws in your state. Next slide, please, when you're ready. So protection orders are state court orders in which a judge orders the abuser to stop the abuse, to stay away from the victim, to have no contact. They can order custody of children. They can prevent international and domestic parental kidnapping. They can order economic remedies, including child support. They can order the abuser out of the family home and allow the victim and the children to stay there. And there are other creative remedies. Next slide when you're ready. Actually, 2 slides forward. So in the context of custody, it's important to understand that under US family laws, custody doesn't automatically go to one parent or the other based on the age of the child or anything else. The courts will look at who is the primary caretaker of the children. They will look at each parent's parenting skills. And they will look at key things like domestic violence or child abuse, and that the perpetrator of domestic violence or child abuse is not likely. That's a factor against giving custody to that person. They'll also look at factors like the child's needs, family relationships, the fitness of a parent, substance abuse, mental illness, and the wishes of all parties. Next slide, please. In terms of child support, when the mother and father of the child are separated, the court will order payments to the custodial parent from the parent who does not have custody of the children. And any parent who is working or has assets can be ordered to pay child support. They don't have to, even people who are working without legal permission to work in the United States. And to become a citizen, ultimately, a person needs to show that they're of good moral character. And one way that people are required to show that is that they provided support for their children. Next slide, please. So now the next point I'm going to talk about has to do with the impact of divorce on immigration status. And this is a very important point for Afghan refugees and for people who have humanitarian parole or are seeking asylum. Because divorce, if someone received their asylum together with or through their spouse, and they were the dependent family member on the application of their spouse, divorce before you obtain lawful permanent residency cuts off the path of the spouse to lawful permanent residency forever. They will remain an asylee, but lose their path to lawful permanent residency or citizenship. So it's important to understand that if in fact you have an ability to file your own asylum case, it avoids that problem as opposed to being included as a family member in somebody else's asylum case. And that generally for other immigrants, refugees, for example, they don't have the same problem with divorce. So it's important if you're in a position of considering divorce to talk to a family lawyer so that you don't do something that could harm your immigration status in the United States. Next slide, please.
Leslie, I'm just going to give the interpreters a moment. They've messaged to say they're still catching up.
Sure. And as I mentioned, it's important to get legal representation, and there are a wide range of free legal services available in the United States that are open to refugees, asylees, and other immigrants, and that and these legal aid programs can help with a variety, all of the family law matters I was just discussing. And there's a link here to where you can find a representative in your state. Okay, so now we're going to move, next slide, please, to talking about the forms of government. There's lots of government-funded benefits and services that are open to everybody, including Afghanis with humanitarian parole, but also immigrants including immigrants that don't have legal status in the United States. And they include legal services, the ability to turn to courts for help, shelter and transitional housing, crime victim services, public education, and the ability to get emergency health care or free health care from community health clinics. Next slide, please. This slide describes where you can go to learn about where healthcare is available for free and low cost through the community and public health system in the United States. Next slide, please. And should you become a victim of crime or need emergency help with things like food, there are also services for crime victims, food programs, soup kitchens, nutrition programs, and shelter and transitional housing programs that can help you. Next slide, please.
Just got another message from the interpreter, so I'm going to give them a moment. Sorry, Leslie.
It's okay. Trying to go as slow as possible.
You should be good now.
ببخشین ما صدا رو نداریم.
So the other thing to note is that some of you, if not now, in the future, may have children who are US citizens or children who have a form of immigration status that gives them access to public benefits that you yourself may not qualify for. And the laws of the United States allow parents to apply for and receive benefits on their children's behalf without regard to the immigration status of the parents.
Yeah. ما رو میشنوین؟ بله؟
Next slide, please. So there are, in terms of immigration status, there are qualified immigrants. There are immigrants who have.
ولی صدای من کسی داره اینجا ترجمه نمیکنین؟
There are
Just wait a
immigrants.
second, Leslie.
Okay, sure.
Folks, I know there's lots of questions. We are going to get those all at the end. Unfortunately, we cannot take them while the presentation is going on. If you're needing to enter the right audio,
میتونین یک دقیقه ما رو انمیوت کنین به خاطر که اینجا خانم‌ها سوال دارن از شما.
چه سوالی دارین؟
بله اینجا یکی از خانم‌هایی که همراه ما هستن سوال دارن درباره طلاق دیورس.
چشم اگه میتونین وایسین تا این تمام میشه یه جای برای سوال داریم.
جای برای سوال داریم درست است. خیلی ما منتظر سوالاتتان میباشیم.
بله مرسی.
thank you, Sahra.
There we go. Oops.
Leslie, am I on the right slide or should I go forward?
More forward.
Okay.
There we go. I was just saying that Afghan humanitarian parolees and asylees and refugees and crime victims generally have more access to public benefits than do other, for example, than do many other immigrants. And which benefits you qualify for vary by state. Next slide when you're ready. So the next speaker is going to talk about the benefits available to refugees that many of you are in the process of currently receiving.
بله ما منتظر هستیم میشنویم منتظر
Once
Leslie, please hold.
Sure.
Zahra, is our Dari interpretation good? Okay, perfect. Leslie, you can continue.
Okay. So as I was saying, the next speaker is going to be talking about, I believe it's next or later in the conversation, about the benefits you receive as refugees. But in addition, there are public benefits that you're eligible for that vary by state. And we have a public benefits map you can go to and a page that we'll post the link to that you can look up by state what public benefits you and your family members qualify for. Next slide when you're ready. And these are all the different kinds of public benefits that the state charts we developed. There's both a chart with all of the legal citations your advocate or you may need to access these benefits, and a simple chart that is for screening, that is easy for you to easily see what you're eligible for and what you may not be eligible for by state. Next slide, please, which has the link, and maybe we could leave it up while they're interpreting so people can get the link. So that concludes my presentation, and I'm going to pass it off to the next speaker when you're ready.
Thank you, Leslie. We're going to hold off here for just a few seconds.
بله بله دقیقاً.
Halitz, just let me know when we should continue.
Thank you, Casey. We can go ahead and move forward.
Okay. So Mia, I think this is you.
Hello, my name is Mia Simpson. I am a PC or Preferred Communities Case Manager with Catholic Charities. And today I'm going to be talking about the first 90 days and beyond. So what to expect in your first 90 days? Your first 90 days are can be hectic, can be a little confusing as you're settling in, and there's a lot happening. So I hope to break it down and make it a little easier for you. Oh. So when you first arrive to the United States, you will be assigned a case manager. A case manager is someone who can help you get connected with public benefits, housing, and job programs. They are also a person who can help answer questions you may have when arriving. A case manager will work with you to set you up for success. A case manager is not somebody who can give legal advice or help in legal matters. We do not have a legal degree. They can refer you to different programs, but they are not able to do the legal work themselves. So when you start, you will be in a program called Afghan Placement and Assistance. Afghan placement and assistance is case management the first 90 days of you arriving in the US. It starts from you landing at the airport and being greeted. Your APA case manager may be able to help connect you with public benefits, food, job programs, a bank account, phone and computer, but asterisk on the computer because it can be a little hard. Cultural orientation, Wi-Fi, utilities, household goods, and everything else you may need to settle for your first 90 days. Your APA case manager will also provide you with approximate, and it changes from state to state, $1,100 per person used for housing security and future rent payments. So when you arrive to the United States, you may be placed in 3 types of housing. There's temporary housing. Some Afghan individuals may be placed with hotels or host families until permanent housing is found. There is also family. Some Afghan individuals might go stay with family that is already established in the US. And then last, there is permanent housing. Permanent housing is housing that you can stay at for long term. This may be an apartment or a house. You will be set up with a rent plan and be given instructions on next steps, as well as a housing contract.
Let's pause here for just a few more seconds, please.
Definitely.
Thank you. I see our interpreters have paused, so we can move forward.
Great.
Najiba, if you can please mute.
So 2 benefits you will be first provided with when arriving to the United States are around food and healthcare. When you arrive, your case manager will help you sign up for food assistance. Each state is different in the amount, but it is a certain amount of money is given for the purpose of buying cold food. So you cannot buy hot meals with your food stamps, but you can buy ingredients to make a meal. Employment or other income may impact your food stamp benefits. Food stamps are determined by household income and not by individual income. When arriving, your case manager will help you sign up for your state's Medicaid program and an initial health screening for you and your family. They will also help you establish a primary clinic. Your health insurance will help you pay for medical care you receive in the United States. You have a right to switch your clinic or providers at any time. So if you don't like your doctor or you don't like your clinic, you can switch. Your employment or income may impact your medical benefits. If you have a young baby or are pregnant, you are also eligible for WIC, which is a program that provides before and after care for a baby. This is what a health insurance card looks like. It will be different depending on what state you're in. In Oregon, the front has your ID. This is how the clinic will bill for their services. The back has numbers that you can call to find a healthcare provider, a dentist, or mental health or substance use services. This card is very important to bring to all your doctor's appointments. Next, oh, great. Education. So there are different education options depending on where you or your child is in their education journey. K through 12, kindergarten through 12th grade, your children are eligible for kindergarten through 12th grade. Schools are determined by the address that you live at. Schools are required to provide interpretive services, transportation options, and updates on your child's progress. If your child is struggling, you can also ask about creating an education plan with the school, and they will provide interpreters for you to be able to do that. Next is preschool. There's a program called Head Start or Early Head Start for kids ages 0 through 5. This program provides preschool education, after-school programs, and childcare for families that qualify. Last is English language learning and beyond. Your state may have an English language learning program to help you learn English and grow your skills. In Oregon, we have one at the community college where you can take 2 semesters worth of English classes for free.
Mia, I'm going to pause you for a second. I'm just looking at the end until, no, you're doing great. Thank you so much. I'm just waiting for the interpreters.
Okay, sorry about that.
Yeah, you're fine. You left off at the community college.
Perfect.
Go ahead, Mia.
You may also be eligible for scholarships to help you pay for higher education. Ask your case manager and local higher education programs, that means colleges and universities, what opportunities are available. To give an example, I have a woman who I'm helping who has a degree in pharmacy tech, and she was able to get a scholarship to get her degree in pharmacy tech in the United States for free. Next, we're going to talk about match grant and refugee assistance. Before I start, I want to warn, not every state has the match grant, so it can be very state to state. If your state has match grant, it is an 8-month program where all the members of the case are enrolled. That means everybody in your family. Upon enrollment, case members or your family will receive a weekly cash allowance of $50 per adult and $10 per child until employed. This is $200 a month per adult or $40 a month per child. Regardless of employment, you will be given 5 months of rent and utilities that are paid for. You will also be given a $15 bonus per week of held employment paid at the end of the 8-month program. So every week you are employed, you will get $15 extra. This program also has job readiness training and job placement assistance, as well as other support for non-employable case members. APA cases, so the program that you start with, must be enrolled within 31 days of arrival. That might change state to state. Other enrollment requirements, there must be one employable adult in the case or in your family. The case or the family must not have received or used any cash assistance. That one is very, very important. You can't have used Tanf or refugee cash assistance to access this program. The case must stay in the area for the entire 8 months of service. So if you move, you will no longer be eligible for match grant.
Mia, I'm going to ask you to slow down just a little bit at this time. Thank you so much.
Perfect. Match grant provides job readiness and training, paying for rent and utilities, assisting with ESL enrollment, that's English language learning, a transportation card to help you take public transportation. Another program you can do instead of Match Grant is Refugee Cash Assistance and Tanf. Refugee Cash Assistance is awarded based on state funding, income, and number of people in a household. Typically for 180 to 210 days. Assistance might be reduced or cut off depending on household employment. TANF, or temporary assistance for needy families, is temporary monthly cash assistance for low-income families that last up to 60 months. This is specifically for families with children under the age of 18. You can also get a bus pass through this program. It can be hard to decide what is best for you. Some questions you might ask yourself: are you a single individual ready to work? If that is the case, Match Grant might be a good fit for you. Match Grant is especially good for those coming with trade skills, looking for employment. Do you have a large family or are unable to work, or are you planning to go back to school? Then public benefits might be a better option for you. If you're unsure, talk about it with your case manager and see which fits best with your lifestyle and rental situation. Next, we are talking about my program, Preferred Communities. Well, it's not mine, but I'm a case manager in it. Not every state has preferred communities, so I do want to start by saying that. This case management is for individuals after the 90 days who still need intensive case management. This may be families and people struggling with physical health, mental health, domestic violence, family troubles, or single-headed households and elderly households. Intensive case management can last for a year and even beyond if needed. You will work on a self-sufficiency plan with your case manager throughout the year. A self-sufficiency plan addresses all the things in your life: food, housing, mental health, physical health, family, and how those things come together. Preferred community case managers will also help with other tasks, such as referrals, future job programs, things that you might need after your 90 days. Preferred communities helps with 3 major areas: mental health. Preferred community case managers can help provide you a safe space to talk about what you're going through. They can also refer you to counseling, group support, and other mental health programs. I know mental health can be scary to talk about, but we're here if you ever need to talk. It can also help with physical health. Preferred community case managers can help you navigate health challenges and health-based resources. They can also help refer you to disability services and SSI, which is a program that provides funding for individuals beyond the age of 65 or individuals living with a physical or intellectual disability. Last is family stability. Preferred community case managers can help you if you are feeling unsafe in your home or struggling with home life. They can refer you to state programs that can help you feel more stable. They can also create a safety plan with you, which is a plan that helps keep you safe, but gives you choice on how you want to do that or achieve safety. And remember, any federal funded program, so TANF, food stamps, by law is required to provide you interpretive services in your native language. That's it for my presentation. I wish you good health and happiness.
Thank you so much, Mia. We're going to hold off a few more seconds before moving forward. Lakshmi, please begin whenever you're ready.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lakshmi Ramakrishnan. I'm with Texas Rio Grande Legal Aid, and I am the managing attorney for our employment team. And I'm here today to talk to you about your rights at work. Texas Rio Grande Legal Aid is, as had been mentioned before, a legal services organization that provides free legal services to low-income individuals. My program covers the southwest portions of Texas, but there are legal aid organizations in all of the states in the United States, and refugees and Afghans with humanitarian parole are eligible for free legal services from your state and local legal aid programs.
Lakshmi, I'm going to ask you to please slow down a lot more. Thank you so much.
Okay. I'm ready for the next slide whenever you are. So there are a lot of different employment laws in the United States, and each state has their own employment laws. But today I'm just going to talk about discrimination and retaliation, sexual harassment, and your rights to minimum wage. And I'm going to focus on the federal laws that apply throughout the United States. Next slide, whenever you're ready. So in the US, there is a general principle called at-will employment. And it means that your employer can fire you for any reason or no reason. An employer can change your hours of work. An employer can give you more work duties. An employer can transfer you to another location. And an employer can change your position. And if you don't like that, you can leave. That is the general idea or concept of at-will employment. However, there are a lot of exceptions to this general idea. So an employer cannot fire you, cannot change your work hours, cannot give you more duties, cannot transfer you, cannot change your position if the reason for doing those things is illegal. In addition, if you have a contract of employment, usually they're in writing, but some guarantee that I am offering you work for a particular period of time under certain terms, then we would look to the contract to determine whether or not an employer can fire you or change the terms. So I'm going to tell you what are the illegal reasons that an employer cannot do. Next slide. Your boss cannot fire you or change your job because of your race, your disability, your sex. Sex discrimination includes because you're pregnant or because you are of your sexual orientation or your gender identity. It is illegal to fire you or change your job because of your religion, because of your age, if you are over 40, because of your national origin, or your employer's belief that you are from another country. Generally speaking, the federal law applies in workplaces with more than 15 employees. But if you are in many states, you only need to have a few employees. So for example, in California and New York and some other states, if there are like 5 employees, then you also cannot be discriminated against in those states. An employer can fire or refuse to hire you if you lack work authorization in the United States. Employers can also impose language requirements like fluency in English. Sometimes it's not obvious that the reason for the discrimination is because of something like your race or your religion. But if you feel like you're just being treated differently than other people who are not of your race or religion, then that might be illegal employment discrimination. Next slide. It is also illegal to fire or treat you worse because you and your coworkers complained about the working conditions. It's usually illegal to fire somebody for talking to your employer about your employment rights. It's illegal to fire you because you made a claim for an injury at work or for workers' compensation, or if you reported unsafe or hazardous conditions in your work. And for places with more than 50 employees, it would be illegal to fire you or retaliate against you because you needed to take family or medical leave. And so
I'm going to pause you there before you continue that point to let the interpreters catch up a bit. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Lakshmi.
Okay, I just wanted to note that family or medical leave is when you need time off work because of your own serious illness or the serious illness of someone in your care, like a child, or if you have just delivered a baby. Those are the kinds of family and medical leave that people typically take. It is usually unpaid leave, but you have a right to it to take up to 12 weeks off per year. And again, that applies to workplaces with more than 50 employees, unless you live in a state where they have their own family and medical leave law, which might have, you might need fewer employees in many states in order to be eligible. Okay, next slide whenever you're ready. Okay, so the previous slides talked about the things that your employer can't do because it's illegal, but your employer sometimes also has to give you things in your workplace. And again, this applies throughout the United States in workplaces with more than 15 employees. They have to provide religious accommodation, which means it could include not requiring you to work on days when you have to have a religious program or you need to observe a religious holiday. If there are uniform policies in your workplace, they may need to change the policy to allow for your religious head covering. And similarly, if your employer wants somebody to be clean shaven as a male, but your religion requires you to have facial hair, they would have to make that accommodation under federal law. Similarly, if you have certain disabilities, employers have to accommodate those disabilities. So if you have a wheelchair, for example, you may need to have ramps or ways to access the building. If you need breaks or opportunity to sit or the ability to attend medical appointments because of your disability, then those are things the employers may be required to provide to you. And a disabilities are things that are, we think of things like diabetes, heart disease, cancers, hearing impairments, blindness. Those are the kinds of things that we are talking about when we talk about disabilities. Okay, so the next thing is sexual harassment. And again, the federal law prohibiting sexual harassment in the workplace applies to workplaces with more than 15 employees. But in many states in the United States, including my state of Texas, sexual harassment is prohibited even if there is only one employee. And so the law includes, for example, if you are working in a household as a domestic worker, you might be covered by your state's laws prohibiting sexual harassment. What is sexual harassment? It is illegal discrimination. It is unwanted sexual behavior and language at work, and it can take many forms. For example, and if you click, you should see there is a spectrum of what behaviors can constitute sexual harassment at work. It could be something like a coworker is always staring at you or looking at your body, or and never saying anything, right? To all the way to touching, to rape. There is all of the conduct in between just staring and rape that is of a sexual and unwanted nature could be sexual harassment in your workplace. Generally, in order for a conduct to be illegal and that you could file a lawsuit over, the conduct has to be severe and pervasive. So incidents where it's just a one-off, or somebody told a dirty joke one time that you didn't like, and it doesn't go on and on and on, you may not be able to bring a lawsuit over that. But it could still be sexual harassment. It's important to keep in mind. Also, if you there's something called quid pro quo, and it just means that if somebody is requiring like a sexual favor from you, like if you do this sexual thing for me, I will give you time off of work, or I'll put your name in for a promotion, or things like that. That's also could be what we call quid pro quo sexual harassment. And next slide when you're ready. There are a lot of myths about what is sexual harassment. So myth number one, it isn't sexual harassment if there's no touching. The fact is, sexual harassment doesn't require touching. Words alone can be harassment. Myth number two, you have to be harassed by a supervisor or a boss in order for it to be illegal. The fact is, sexual harassment by a coworker can be illegal.
Lakshmi, we'll ask that you just slow down one tiny bit in this part. Thank you.
Myth number three, you have to be harassed by another employee in your workplace in order for it to be illegal. The fact is, harassment by customers, clients, patients, if you work in a medical setting, those kinds of things can be illegal harassment. The idea is that it is up to your employer to address harassment by whoever is doing it. It is up to your employer to address harassment in your workplace. It is never your fault if you're sexually harassed. And it's important to know that you should tell your employer if you're being harassed so that they can do something about it if they don't know it's going on. Another myth is that
Just going to give the interpreters one moment to catch up. Thanks, Lakshmi. Okay, whenever you're ready.
The last myth on this slide is comments or actions that are not directed at you are not sexual harassment. And the fact is, comments or actions directed at others in your workplace can be sexual harassment if it creates what we call a hostile work environment. Again, hostile work environment requires severe and pervasive. So as an example, if you are surrounded by coworkers who share a lot of images or pornography, or they are telling jokes and they may be not talking to you, but you have to see that every day that you go into work, that could be a hostile work environment. And next slide, whenever you're ready. So what can you do if you are being harassed in your workplace? First thing is get safe. Get yourself out, if you can, of a situation where you're uncomfortable. Talk to somebody that you trust. And if you feel safe, you can tell the harasser to stop. But in terms of your legal rights, you should report the harassment to your employer. It depends on what your employer's policy is. If they have a written policy, you should follow it. So larger workplaces, if it's a coworker harassing you, you usually report to your immediate supervisor. But many places will have phone lines for their human resources department where you should be able to make that complaint. And again, if the employer doesn't know about the harassment that's going on, they may not be legally responsible for correcting the problem. So that's why following your employer's reporting policy is important. make written notes of what happened, and document it. You know, if you can take audio or video if you feel safe and if there is opportunity. If you're working in a workplace where there's no policy and you don't feel safe reporting issues, and if it's something that is a criminal act, you could contact the police. You should also contact the United States Equal Employment Opportunities Commission, or EEOC, or talk to an attorney. Okay, next slide, remember. Okay, next we're going to talk about your pay. When you look at your pay check, you want to look and see, are you getting paid for all of your hours? In the United States, an employer must pay you for the hours you worked. No excuses. If you did the work, you get paid, even if they don't like what you did. Even if you didn't do a good job, if you worked, you should get paid. You should try to keep track of your own time that you worked in a calendar or take notes, just in case you think that your employer may not be paying you for all the time you worked. Next. The next question is, are you getting at least the minimum wage? The minimum wage in the United States is $7.25 per hour. But many states, 30 states in the United States, have higher minimum wage rates. So for example, in California, the minimum wage is $14 an hour. And in Virginia, it's $11 an hour. Massachusetts is $14.25 per hour. So important to find out what your state's minimum wage is. There are also some states that do not have a minimum wage. So you would be wanting to find out whether the federal minimum wage of $7.25 per hour applies to you. The way that you find out is you take your total hours for the work week, the total amount that you're paid, and divide it by the hours that you worked, and it should be a minimum of $7.25 per hour. If you work more than 40 hours in a work week, in many workplaces, you would be entitled to overtime, which is 1.5 times your regular rate of pay. So if you're regularly paid $10 an hour and you work 40 hours, on the 41st hour, that hour should be paid $15. That's overtime. And I've put a link here to the website for the United States Department of Labor, which has information for each state on what that state's minimum wage is. There are a lot of exemptions to overtime, but this information is applicable to, the majority of jobs. And next slide. If you work in a restaurant, usually restaurants pay people partially in pay and partially in tips. And in the United States, the federal law says the workplace can pay you $2.13 per hour. And then the rest of your pay will come from money that customers are leaving behind as tips. It's typically restaurants. Other examples include like nail salons, hair salons, any place where it's kind of customary for the customers to leave tips. They could possibly pay you partially in tips. It's important to keep in mind that if part of your work is not considered tipped work, so for example, if you're in a restaurant, the chefs, the cooks, and the people in the back, they have to be paid regular minimum wage. They can't be paid in tips. So if some of the time you're working in the back of the restaurant and some of the time you're working as a waitress, then special rules may apply to how you are paid. Ultimately, you still have to get at least $7.25 per hour with combining the employer's pay and your tips together. And your managers cannot take any of your tip. The owner of the restaurant cannot take any of your tip. Whatever is on the table that's left for you is yours if you are being paid in tips. The only permissible exception is if they have something called tip pools where they take all of the tips and they divide it between front of house workers. So that's host, waitress, busboys can be a part of a tip pool where they take all the tips and pay out a portion of your tips can go to some of the other people who are working in the when I say front of house, I mean where the people come and sit and eat inside of a restaurant. So that's, I have one more slide. The last slide is just to let you know where you can get help. As I mentioned, legal services organizations exist throughout the United States, and you can search lsc.gov is the website to find your nearest legal aid organization. The United States Department of Labor has many divisions, but the Wage and Hour Division is responsible for investigating unpaid minimum wage and unpaid overtime. They will receive complaints regarding the payment of wages, and they will investigate, and they can also help you recover unpaid minimum wage from your employers. The U.S. Equal Employment Opportunities Commission investigates claims of employment discrimination, which I mentioned was discrimination based on race, religion, sex, pregnancy, age, disabilities. You must file paperwork in the EEOC in order to pursue legal action against an employer for discrimination. Or there are also state and city versions of this anti-discrimination or agency. And then lastly, if you want to report unsafe or hazardous workplace conditions, you can contact the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, or OSHA, and they also receive complaints and will investigate and help remedy unsafe working conditions. And they will also, it's illegal to fire someone for making a complaint to OSHA regarding health and safety violations. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Lakshmi, and thank you so much to all of our presenters.